Yay!
I went super high pitch. I don't know why. Welcome, everyone, to Ginger Runner Live, episode number 273. Tonight, we're very excited because our guest is fresh off of a world record. It is not often we get to say that on this show, to be totally honest. We have some of the world's best on this show from time to time, and tonight we get to say that we have a world record holder.
Yes.
In the 100-mile distance, brand new record set this weekend at 6 days in the Dome. We're going to find out about the event, the passion behind this pursuit. Our guest, Zach Bitter, will be joining us here in just a second. So sit back, relax. We appreciate your patience here as we got the show started. We just wanted to work out some audio tweaks and stuff. But at this point, we're like, let's just get Zach on because there's so many great questions in the chat room already formulating and everything like that. So we just want to get right into it. Sit back, relax. Ginger Runner Live begins now.
Ginger Runner.
Yay!
You went high pitch again.
I did. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. I know you're typing in the chat room.
Yeah.
I interrupted you. I caught you off guard. Welcome, everyone, to Ginger Runner Live, episode number 273.
We're getting up there?
Yeah. Nailed
Question
it.
mark?
Oh, nailed it. Nailed it. We had plenty of time to practice before we started the show. We're on fire tonight. Our guest is a world record holder, and I'm sure he is pleased to be able to say this because he's been pursuing this world record for quite some time. As soon as it happened this last week, I mean, we've been talking about this guy for years just amongst ourselves, just kind of following his pursuits and following his journey. He's an incredible ultra runner. You go look at his ultra sign up, for example, and it's a lot of ones in the overall positions. He has won a number of races, but has really been getting after this 12-hour pursuit along a track and 100-mile distance on a track at different events. And this last weekend at 6 days in the Dome, which, by the way, is still going on. So that's one thing I wanted to actually start the show with. If anyone is at 6 days in the Dome right now watching this live show, because our guest tonight was just there, setting a new world record, we'd love to hear from you in the chat room. Let us know if you are there. Let us know if you are actually running around the track right now.
Watching the show.
Yeah, because I know a lot of these people who do this 6 day around the track. They're not running hard for 6 days. There's spurts of hard running, but they might be walking and they might be having like headphones in and watching this on a phone or something. So that would be really amazing. But let us know in the chat. Our guest tonight, Zach Bitter, just set the world record in the 100-mile distance. To give you an idea, 100 miles is a far distance.
Correct.
11 hours, 19 minutes, and 13 seconds. It's just mind-blowing.
Yeah, I think when I read that, I looked at you and said, I can't even run 50 miles in that time.
Yeah. You compare that time to any, like my 50-mile times, my 100K times, my 100-miler time. You just look at those and go, it doesn't even compare. Like we're awake maybe 11 hours in a day, sometimes maybe a little bit longer. But during that time, he just had a world record running a 100-mile distance around a track. Unbelievable feat. We're going to introduce our guest tonight, Zach Bitter, here in just a second. But of course, I'm not the only person here. There's also Kim. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm great. You guys, if you are new to the show, welcome. I know we have some new viewers tonight.
Yeah.
So welcome, everybody. There was somebody that chimed in saying, this is my first time joining live. It must be my fault that we're starting
A little bit
today.
later.
It wasn't your
It's not your
fault.
fault.
All good. So
Tech
if you
never
are
works out.
Exactly. So if you are new to the show, my name is Kim. Welcome. I'll be watching the chat room. We are going to be taking questions live for Zach. A lot of you guys have already been asking
Chatting
away.
away.
There are a lot of great questions in the chat room, but keep them coming. We'll be pulling them throughout the hour.
Yeah, and as I mentioned in the pre-show, just having a world record holder on this show, it's rare, and it's so awesome that he was able to take some time away tonight to join us. I'll introduce him in just a second. We like to start every show by thanking some individuals that help make this show happen. Our Patreon crew, those who support us over on Patreon, patreon.com/thegingerrunner for as little as $1. They help everything happen here. We're able to do these live shows every single Monday. We've been doing it now for almost 6 years. It is because of them that we're able to do this, plus our reviews, plus our films. We make documentaries, all sorts of things. And this is our full time. And it's because of our Patreon crew. 3 individuals in particular at the top tier are just incredibly gracious and wonderful humans. Chris Lee in Hong Kong. Actually, just spoke to Chris this week. He's doing great. I know that there's a lot of, obviously, things happening in Hong Kong that are making the news
right now. Yeah.
But I've been keeping up with him and his organization, Trailblazer. They showcase a lot of the beautiful trails that Hong Kong has to offer. There's some amazing races there. It's a great place to go for trail running. Hopefully things are getting figured out there. Chris has kind of given me an update. So visiting there will feel less scary. But Chris is just a wonderful human and just does great things for the trail running community there. Rick Bjarnason and his team at Cheeky Monkey Media, amazing humans. Rick himself is an ultra runner, just finished Sinister 7 this summer. That's a mouthful. Just finished Sinister 7, which is a brutal 100-mile race up there in Canada. Rick is a web designer, and they completely redid the gingerrunner.com website, so go check that out. Big shout out to him and his team. And Brian Sands, longtime supporter, wonderful human, has an incredible, inspiring journey of losing 100 pounds, training for his first marathon, crushing that, then a 50K, just ran the Squamish 50K and was so close to getting it done, but a knee injury ended up sort of taking the day away from him, but he didn't give up. He ended up having to time out. But it's been just wonderful following his journey, and he has inspired so many people. He just proves that it doesn't matter if you've ever run before, you can set goals and you can achieve them. So Brian's just a wonderful contributor to our show and helps make this happen. Thank you for that. And without further ado, I'd love to introduce our incredible guest who's hanging out patiently in the wings. Without further ado, the world record holder in the 100-mile distance and the 12-hour distance record holder as well, Mr. Zach Bitter.
Yay.
Hey, Kim, Ethan, thanks for having me on.
Dude, like
Yeah,
I'm
it's good to
actually
be here.
surprised that you are awake and that you're like willing to do this. So that first and foremost, thank you so much for being willing to sit down and do a podcast like hours after getting the world record.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We were chatting about this a bit before, but I just, whenever I try to feel a little tired, I just think, yeah, there's people that are doing a 6-day right now, and I did 1/12 of that. So I can stay up a couple hours later than normal if I need to.
No doubt. Speaking just kind of about this journey, so I kind of want to go back in time for you a little bit because obviously you're a very seasoned ultra runner. You've been doing this a long time. What really drew you to the sport? Because I feel like just kind of following you as a fan for a long time, it's really neat to see this evolution, to see where you are now, and especially pursuing this 100-mile record and that sort of thing. But what initially brought you into trail running or even just endurance running in general? Let's start there.
Yeah, no, I got into endurance running pretty early on in middle school, but it was rather low key, as you would imagine at that age. Basically the presidential physical fitness challenge. I don't know if they still do those, but they did when I was in middle school. So, I remember loathing the V-sit reach and the shuttle run and the pull-ups and all that stuff. But for whatever reason, out of my 8 classmates, I was the only one who enjoyed the mile. So maybe that was the writing on the wall that endurance was more the angle for me. And, my parents are really supportive about just sports in general, and they let me kind of be really curious. And when I decided to do races and wanted to, they kind of opened up all the doors that needed to be opened in order for me to be able to participate in things like that. And I kind of started to get into a little bit more of the methodology behind kind of training and racing in high school. By the end of it, I was pretty excited about it. But then once I went to college, I went to a Division III school in Wisconsin, UW Stevens Point, and our coach there had been a coach for quite some time, I think like 30 or 40 years or something like that. So he just had like a wide range of knowledge, and just learning from him kind of periodizing training and like what specific workouts do and all that stuff got me really excited about the sport in general. And, one thing I kind of recognized as I learned kind of how to run, which sounds kind of funny because it seems like an easy enough thing to do. But when I learned how to run was I really enjoyed the long run on the weekends. And so after I got done with college, I kind of started to gravitate towards just doing that more specifically. And then that kind of led towards ultra marathoning,
Mm.
and you kind of know how it goes with ultra marathon running. You do one, and then you kind of get curious about either, well, how much faster can I do that distance, or what can I do if I go up in distance? And before you know it, you're running more miles in one day than you ever thought you would in a week.
Exactly. I'm I'm just fascinated because going from, like a 50K or to from that kind of common evolution of a 50K to a 50 miler to a 100K to the 100 miler, was there a specific distance that you were really drawn to? Was it longer and faster? Was it longer and harder? Was it fast and shorter distances? What was sort of that like initial draw?
Yeah, I had no real knowledge of the sport when I did my first ultra marathon. I was just looking on some websites about some races around the fall time frame to kind of train for, and I stumbled upon the North Face 50-mile endurance challenge, Midwest one that's in Wisconsin where I was living at the
Right.
time. And I was just like, huh, that looks kind of interesting. And I had just decided to go back to grad school. I noticed there was $1,000 prize purse there. So I was like, grad students can use money. So I was like, maybe I'll do that. Who knows? Maybe I could win it. And that was kind of my dipping my toe into the waters of ultra marathoning. And I had no clue at that time that there was, the wide range of ultra distances and events that you can find, much less the
Mm.
different environments you can do these things in. So, it wasn't even, I think a lot of times when people who know about the sport and know about me, they can think of me as like the flat ultra runner, which is fairly appropriate, I would say. But I didn't even know there were flat ultra marathons yet when I did my first one. So that kind of got me interested. And then I'm a curious enough person. So I started looking into the sport a little more and started to, go down that rabbit hole, so to speak, and saw all the different options that were available. And, by the end of 2011, I was pretty much hooked, but still more or less drawn to kind of that 50-mile distance. And then, I did my first 100 miler at the Western States Endurance Run in 2012, and that kind of opened up the door in terms of, oh, there's mountains, oh, there's 100
Yeah.
milers, and all this other stuff. So ultimately, I got kind of used to the sport enough to realize how important the specificity of the environment you train is in terms of where you race, if you want to really kind of meet your full potential. And living in Wisconsin, we had plenty of flat roads and stuff to train for. So ultimately, I started checking out some of those events just so I could kind of peak for them a little more appropriately. And that's kind of what got me into kind of the more flat timed event stuff.
I love this because when I started ultra running back 2011, 2012, it was I still consider myself a noob to the sport, but it was really cool when I found out that there were flat ultras. You mentioned that yourself, and for some reason, when I ran my first ultra, I was like, oh my god, that was so hard, and it just gets harder because the distances get longer and the mountains get bigger and you get altitude and technical terrain and all that sort of thing. And it wasn't until I ran my first, it was a 12-hour event here. It was also on trail, but I started learning about 12-hour events, 24-hour events, 6-day events that are currently going on, and flat ultras. What is it about the flat ultras that sort of drew you in?
Yeah, so once I did one, the flat part of it was kind of like what I said. It was just more or less a training specificity thing. But once I got into it, I kind of realized that it's different than the trails. It's like it's really transparent is the best way I can probably describe it, especially when you get on some of these short loop courses, and then the really short ones like an actual 400-meter track. It's different in the sense that if I go around, I can see my split every 400 meters if I choose to. So if I slow down 2 seconds, I know that was entirely me. There was no hill, there was no mountain, there was no like rocks or anything like that to get in my way. So that consistency really kind of shines a spotlight on whether you're doing things right or if you're doing things wrong. And that like kind of hyper transparency was really kind of eye opening to me, and also kind of motivating, because then I could maybe wrap my head around a little bit more of whether I was doing things right or if I needed to adjust things in training to prepare for a race. And it also kind of makes it a little easier for someone who maybe is really curious and just seeing how far they can push themselves, because you can control so many elements that if I go to a race, like say Desert Solstice one year, if I go to the next year, minus an extreme weather shift, I can pretty much count on whether I did better or worse than the year before versus, maybe a trail race from 100 mile. Like if I do the San Diego 100 versus the Western States 100 is really hard to kind of see like, well, which one was better, which one was worse.
I love that ability to be able to, I mean, for someone like you who's been pursuing this 100-mile record for years, I imagine that specificity, that accuracy, you're talking about, you can see your quarter-mile split, and if it's 2 seconds off, it's obvious that you have to pay attention to those specific details when even if you're in a 12-hour pursuit or 11 hours and 19 minutes, like you have to focus on every second. That's I can see how that's important, and the place where you're racing is also important. We'll get to more of those specifics here, and Desert Solstice versus 6 Days in the Dome and all these different events that you've attempted the record at. But first, a reminder, we are live. Kim, you pulled a number of live questions. The audience is
a lot of great questions. Yeah, great question from Nathaniel in the chat room. Nathaniel says, Zach, you've said the key to ultra marathons is the brain, and that while running ultras might seem physical, much is mental. How important is race day mental focus, and how do you prepare mentally?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And, the way I kind of describe the mental approach to, I think, a lot of endurance and not all endurance events is you kind of have these situations where you get up to a point where you have a little bit of doubt, and it's kind of hard to admit that sometimes, but you'll get to a point of doubt. And early on, it's easy to kind of slap that doubt down and just kind of push through it. And it just keeps kind of popping up. So the difference between, say, a really good day and an average day or a poor day is just kind of how many times you can keep doing that. So, if I had a bad day for like a 12-hour event, I might get to 6 hours and I'm no longer able to kind of push back the doubt and continue to believe I can continue on at the pace versus, a day like I had on Saturday where I was having those seeds of doubt kind of come at me, but for whatever reason on that day I was able to kind of push past them and focus in on them. I think some of that is just, first of all, getting the consistent training in and preparing specifically for the event you're doing so you have that confidence to know when you get that to come up that you've done what you needed to do to push through this and kind of continually remind yourself that. But also kind of working your brain in a way where you're not necessarily thinking about the end of the race too early on. And, that's kind of maybe the double-edged sword with some of these timed events where you have such available information as to like what your splits are, what your pace is, what each lap is. But ultimately, like if I run, say I do run 2 seconds slow on a lap at mile 40, if I let that kind of eat me up in my mind, I'm going to have a hard time getting back on pace and I can fall off and then ultimately have a bad day versus like saying, okay, let's just get back on pace and worry about this next 3-mile section versus the 60 miles I have to go. So kind of trying to break it down to this kind of these bite-sized chunks is always, I think, really valuable. The other thing I do too is I try to like pre-plan a bit, and it gets easier the more you do it sometimes, I think, because you just have more time in the sport and more resources to pull from as things to motivate you to. And, one that I've really liked to use is just trying to kind of take inventory as you're doing the training for the race itself about how much hard work you're doing and how much things you're sacrificing to get in the amount of work ultra runners do to prepare for these races, so that when it comes to race day, even if it is a long race, it's really small relative to the amount of time you spent. So kind of reflecting back to that, and maybe I have 6 hours left on the track, but 6 hours on the track is really tiny compared to the hundreds of hours spent to get to the track in the first place.
That's a good way of looking at it. I was just thinking about that today on our long run. It's just the number of hours that go into training for a single 100-miler, let alone multiple per year or long ultras per year, and just the amount of training that goes into those, and putting it into perspective of like 12 hours out there or 11 hours and 19 minutes out there is a fraction of the total time spent training and working your muscles and your mind and your body. Let's get to more of these live questions. Great ones.
Yeah, question from Deb in the chat room. Deb says, Jack
Sparrow.
Zach, how did this world record goal come about, and how long have you been training for it? Maybe you can give us a little history behind this goal.
Sure. Yeah. So my kind of interest in this record started back in 2013. I kind of had an interesting year that year. I was training for a 50 miler, the Tussey Mountain Back 50 miler, and that was kind of going to be my peak race for the year, more or less. And I went there and I had a pretty solid day but I ended up getting second place behind Matt Flaherty, and the year before I had won. So part of me was kind of like, I won it last year and then I got second. That's kind of a step back, even though, Matt's a phenomenal runner in his own right, and I'm not too ashamed to get beat by him. But it kind of got me interested or excited to maybe try to do something yet that year. So I ended like kind of impromptu signing up for a 50-mile race in Chicago. It's for the Lakefront 50 miler. And it was, since Tussey was on a Sunday and Lakefront was on a Saturday, and it'd be like 13 days between the two. And with only that short amount of recovery time, I ended up running 5 hours and 12 minutes for that 50 miler. And that is what really kind of got me excited about the flat stuff, because that was the flattest 50 miler I'd run to date. And the people have listening, most of them probably haven't been to the lakefront. If you get good weather there, it's basically a 10K out, 10K back, and you just repeat that till you get to 50 miles. And, so you can just really rip it up there if you don't get bad weather. And we had perfect weather that day. So I was really excited after that event. And then, I think, at the time, Nick Curry, was still part of the Aerobible Racing organization, had reached out to me and said, "Hey, we've got this race here in Phoenix, Arizona called the Desert Solstice Track Invitational, where people just target records. And, we think that you'd maybe be a good fit to try to do one of them." And I responded, I was like, "Yeah, let's do this." So I think it was maybe 5 weeks after the Chicago Lakefront. I went there with the mindset of going after the American record for 100 miles, primarily just because I had seen an article and some news feeds about John Olson, who had just recently broke what then was the American record for 100 miles, and the first American to actually break 12 hours in 100
12
miles.
hours, yeah.
11:59 and some change. So my thought going in was like, well, if I ran 50 miles in 5:12, I can probably go through 50 miles in like 5:45 and then just hold on for dear life and squeak under 12 hours. So I ended up having a pretty solid day, all things considered, there in 2013, and ran 11:47 for 100 miles, which was the new American record. And the kind of funny thing about that too, and it kind of shines a light on my newbiness to the sport at the time as well, is I didn't even know a 12-hour timed event existed, much less a world record for it.
Right.
So Nick Curry actually had come up to me on the track that day when I was just past 90 miles. And he said, "So there's this 12-hour world record that you're on pace for if you just keep going at this pace." And the funny thing about it is, like, maybe a lap or two earlier, I was kind of watching my splits and I was just convinced. I swore to myself, there's no way I can go any faster, but I can at least maintain this pace. And then once he gave me that information, I was running like 4 seconds per lap faster. So that kind of gives you an idea of the mental side of the whole ordeal. But that really got me hooked then. That was probably like the race that more or less got me a little more into the sport in terms of like recognition and putting up a result that was kind of high level. So at that point, I started kind of digging into some of these timed event things and looking into kind of the history of it. Some of the greats like Yannis Kouros, Ray Clark, and all these other great kind of 50 milers, Bruce Fordyce, the whole list. And you start to see the stories and kind of how they approached it. And I got really excited about kind of just how to prepare for it and that sort of stuff. So that's what kind of got me excited about that. And then in 2015, I went back to Desert Solstice to go after the world record, because when I ran 11:47 and I was told that's the American record, my next thought was, well, if that's the American record, what's the world record? So right. I found out that Oleg Kirtanov from Russia ran 11:28:03 in 2002 at the Crystal Palace in the UK. And that race, folks, if you haven't ever looked into that, it was pretty incredible, because there's actually two people duking it out. One guy went out a little quicker. Oleg, the ultimate winner, went out a little slower. And he was like, from what I hear, was running like low 6-minute pace and caught the other guy with like 800 meters to go. And they both ran 11:28 and got under the then Don Ritchie 11.5-hour world record. So I was like, that just kind of excited me. And I was like, I think I can do 11:28 or faster. So I put in what was probably still to say the biggest training block I'd ever done in 2015 to get ready for it. I think it was my 3-week peak for that was like somewhere in the neighborhood of 135, 150, and 170 miles before my taper. And, that was, I was all in that year, and, I went out trying to go for 11:28. I had some pretty solid splits early on. Was on pace basically all day, but the last 20 miles I was starting to really start like hemorrhage some time and slowed quite a bit, and was averaging between like 7:30 and 8-minute pace for that last 15, 20 miles, and ultimately kind of slipped behind the world record, but was able to nip my American record around 11:40 and 55 seconds there. So it was still improvement at least, which kind of kept, I think, the energies going.
I listen. I just want to point out real quick that I hope you realize. I hope you have people in your life that are able to tell you on a regular basis that what you do is amazing. There are very few humans that can run at this level for this duration, and it's really interesting to hear someone of this level talk about it. And I'm not saying that you're kind of brushing these numbers off, but casually talk about an 11:47 100-mile American record, which you then dropped to 11:40:55. Even thinking about the world record after that of like, oh, well, maybe I could go another 15 minutes faster and break the 11:28:03. Like these are amazing times that we live in, and I'm not going to let you slip by without recognizing the fact that all of these numbers since 2013, and obviously before that, but your numbers are just, they're mind-boggling. And as a regular mid-pack runner, obviously I cannot even remotely relate because your pace for this world record, especially at 6:48 average per mile, is just like one of those, I got a 6:40 mile today. Like one. Like for me, that's a huge breakthrough. So it is just so cool to hear this and to think what a really special place to be able to look at this and go, hey, I can break the American record. I can better my American record. I can go after the world record. And these are all like extremely stout times that have stood the test of time. I believe the world record was set in 2002. So it's almost 20 years that thing has been standing. And I want to get to this world record here in just a second. Let's get to one more live question though. Whatever you got.
Yeah. Let's see here. Let's see. Everything's pretty centered around the.
Okay, let's get into it then.
Let's dive in.
You literally have 15 questions pulled aside, but I think they're all about what we're about to talk about. Let's do that.
I didn't want to jump the gun with the questions.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So first, let's start with the differences between these events, because obviously Desert Solstice different than 6 days in a dome. What are the benefits and what are sort of the changes in that nuance that you have to incorporate either into training or into a mental focus to do these two different events? Because I imagine going after a record outdoors on a track where you got elements, you got wind, versus in a dome which everything is controlled. Like how is this different for you? And do you expect a certain result based off of the event?
Yeah, it's really interesting to me because I think once you decide to go after like a timed event on a track, you're essentially kind of trying to put yourself in a position where you minimize the amount of variables that can influence your race that you can't control.
Sure.
So then there's always going to be some still, but you find yourself kind of getting a little silly, almost hyper focusing on small variables that if you were doing like a trail 100 would never cross your mind. But like you said, Desert Solstice always has the opportunity to have some weather issues. For example, in 2015, I had like just really lucky weather. I think it was between 60 and 70 degrees all day. It was overcast that year, so we didn't have direct sunlight all year. 2013 was really good, all things considered. It was direct sunlight, but it was no hotter than 70. I had a failed attempt there in 2017 where I had dropped at 100K, and it was just a little warmer those other years. I was so fixated on the world record, I was unwilling to kind of maybe let back due to the weather that was given to me that day. And so those are kind of things that are uncontrollable. The other thing too is like these events aren't built around me. They're not built around the 12-hour or the 100-mile. They're typically built around 24-hour events. And right. As you can imagine, someone who's going to go out there and try to last for 24 hours isn't going to be running as fast as someone trying to go for 12 hours. So there is a lot of running in lane two sometimes around the turns, and so you're going to add some distance just by default, and that's kind of a reality. And those two things are kind of similar almost no matter where you go, unless you find an event that is like what they did at the Crystal Palace with the world record set in 2012, where it was designed specifically for that. And you don't see a lot of that these days. And I think we will probably in the future, but for now, you kind of take what you can get. So the dome offered a really unique thing where it eliminated that environmental aspect. In fact, it optimized it because it's the Olympic training facility in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, called the Pettit Center, and the use for that facility is for hockey games and speed skating competitions. So they keep it at a nice crisp 55 degrees. So I was like, this is perfect. I can count on 55. I can count on no sun. So then really the only uncontrollable there is going in lanes 2 and sometimes 3 to pass people and kind of managing that logistic. But everything else was very easy to dial in. So that was really exciting for me, and that was probably the biggest advantage to doing it there versus somewhere like Desert Solstice.
I'm glad you brought the lane thing up, because that's something I noticed from footage, from photographs, everything that I've seen from this last weekend as I was watching and stuff. And it was kind of mind blowing to me as someone who hasn't done one of these track based events, but obviously wants to. I think someday I really do want to take one of these things on. I was really surprised that the inside lane is reserved for, I mean, you're passing essentially on the outside. Is this a strategic thing? Is this a rule thing? Is this common amongst all of these sort of track events? I was just really surprised to see that. So as someone who obviously was watching, I'm like, oh man, imagine what his time could have been had he been on the inside line the entire time. So how does that work?
Yeah, so track protocol, I think regardless of the distance, if you want to certify an event, is that it's the responsibility of the person doing the passing to move to the outside. So it's not the responsibility of the person getting passed to give you the right of way, so to speak. So in fact, sometimes like it's almost easier for them just to stay there, because if they try to, sometimes this will happen too. Like I'll be coming up and they'll be like, oh, I got to get out of Zach's way. So they'll try to move right as I'm trying to move out. And then we kind of have this little like back and forth, almost run into each other. And, it's not, that's not a very big issue. It maybe happens a couple times here and there, but what it ultimately ends up meaning is that I'm going to have to be in lanes 2 and sometimes lanes 3 in order to, pass people. And sometimes people get bunched up and you find yourself out in lane 2, lane 3 for an entire turn. Other times you get kind of lucky and there's just nobody there and you can hug the edge. I would say at the Dome, I probably averaged a little closer to lane 2 than anything. I had a few times where I was in lane 3 and a few times where I was in lane 1 the whole lap, but a lot of it was in lane 2. So, you're going to add a little bit of distance there. I think one year at Desert Solstice, we estimated it's probably more like 101 to maybe 102 miles. I would guess probably maybe a little closer to 101 unless you get a really busy year on the track and just the odds are against you and everyone seems to be on the turns when you are. But it is one of those things where, when I think about what my max potential in this event is, I could potentially take 10, 12 minutes off my PR just with that. So at that point, you start getting, for me specifically, down into some times where we're getting down to the low 11-hour range. And for folks who are kind of curious, personally, I think like we've got the talent in the sport here in North America to get guys under 11 hours and some probably well under 11 hours. So I think the human potential is far from being realized in this event. And I think it's going to be cool in the next few years. I'm just, that's my goals with doing this have slightly shifted from when I first did it from, I want to be a world record holder and hold on to that for dear life to, well, how fast can we have this thing done and like rewrite the history books, so to speak. So, one of my goals with some of these things is hopefully I can run a fast enough time and get enough attention for it that it draws some of these other fast guys and gals out to take a swing at it and see how fast 100 miles can be run.
Yeah, it's almost like a sense of outreach. Like you're putting a spotlight on a type of event that many people know of, but maybe many people don't, or many people sort of gloss over, like, oh, I would never do well on a track-based event, or I'm spending all my time in the mountains.
Goals,
Yeah, the goals are in one area of the sport rather than another. So I think this is great. Another great reason of you just having you on the show. Like maybe there will be someone that listens that is like, I want to try one of these events, whether it's someone trying it for the first time and they just are going to for 12 hours. Like that's the first time I've ever run 12 or 24 or 6 days, for example. Or maybe it is one of those elite men and women that's like, I'm going for it. I want to
Yeah.
get that world record. Lots of live questions, Kim. You've been very patient.
Yeah, a question from Deb in the chat room. She says, "Curious if like across the years, do you switch direction every few hours, or did you run the entire 100 miles in one direction on the track?"
Yeah, it's a good question. And most events that I've done have had protocol where every 4 hours you switch directions. I think I did once where it was 6, but 4 is pretty typical.
Is there a reason for that? Is it just to keep your head from blowing up?
Yeah, I think they just recognize the level of monotony people are dealing with, so they give them anything they can to look forward to. And it is funny when you start to just put things into perspective a little bit, the goofy little things that you kind of look forward to. But when you're at like hour 3, it can be a distraction from thinking about the end of the race. You think, okay, this next hour, then I can turn directions, and then, or if you're at hour 7, same thing, and create these kind of mini benchmarks that maybe an aid station would do in a trail race that you just don't have at an event like this.
Interesting. Go for it.
Yeah, this is a two-parter by two different people. Both Nathaniel and Deb had questions to be asked together. The question was, "What's your opinion of doping in ultra running and the others and the sport's response to it? A handful of runners have either tested positive at ultras or tested positive prior to moving to ultras." And then Deb's follow-up question was, did you have to get drug tested before or after the 100-mile attempt?"
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And, it's one of those things where I think it's really tough, and the more you dig into it, the more you just kind of feel like there's kind of a no real good answer to the whole situation and all. And I think with a lot of the sports we've historically had really big doping issues, it kind of became a culture of the sport. I mean, like Tour de France cycling, and even like elite track and field, they've been pretty well documented that there's a lot of problems with that. I think ultra running in North America is maybe a little different because the community was built up kind of more on the trails, more as like the adventure side of thing. And that's not to say, like, I don't want to sound naive and think like, oh, no one's doping in North America, but there's certainly people who are. I don't think it's probably nearly as big of a problem as it is in other sports. But I think it is worthy of kind of paying attention to. And I don't know that I have a good answer in terms of what to do about it. I mean, ultimately, it's something that is an exhaustive amount of resources financially if you really want to do like out of season testing, which would be the kind of the necessity to catch people who are trying to skirt the rules. So it's tough. And then when you get even further into it, maybe a little more outside of ultra running and to other sports too, where there's people living in third world countries who are they're trying to get out of poverty to a degree, and then so their options could be doping and get out of poverty, or don't and not. And it's like that's getting down to like a whole nother almost ethical issue versus just like the enjoyment of sport. Ultimately, I think it's got to be kind of a pretty strict thing when it comes to sport, though, and we need to be strict about it. And when it can be conclusively proven, I think a lifetime ban is probably appropriate in most cases. It's the only way to really make it a deterrent in this day and age. In terms of my testing, I did get tested after. I think protocol for world records, if it's an event that is recognized by USAT or by USATF, they'll test you for the world records there. So that they recognize the 100-mile and the 12 hours. So I got tested after. I didn't get tested before or anything like that, though.
I was curious about that. We saw it at States. It was good to see testing to some degree at States. And I was curious in this case, because of the world record and because of the level of
If
this.
it put it in a
Yeah,
different-
put in a different league or different classification or anything like that. Has it been ratified? Has it been fully confirmed?
Yeah, I won't know for a bit yet. I think it takes a couple of weeks for them to kind of get it through the lab and all that stuff before all the results will come through. So I'll get an email eventually saying that I'm legit.
Sweet.
So there's
we'll be able to put that in the title of this live show too, so people can watch it later. It just says legit in parentheses, like a week from now. Legit.
Yeah, but
go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I don't want to belabor, but like it is. I think we saw kind of in like kind of the mixed martial arts community a bit too, where
Hmm.
testing is good enough where you run into issues where people buy a supplement or something like that and it was mixed in the same batch as something that has a banned substance, or people just don't do their homework and check, and they take something that's over the counter and has something that's banned in there, and they end up finding themselves in a bad situation. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's like if you're going to be in an event that is sanctioned, you could got to pay attention to what you're having and save your stuff too, because you send it in afterwards, and they can test it. If you have a product that is clearly labeled that is not have a performance enhancing substance in it, and it turns up there's traces in there, then they can clear you for that too. So there's a lot of kind of rabbit holes with that topic.
I know. I mean, we even ran into it this weekend just watching Pikes Peak and the first female and her history and stuff like that with the fertility drugs and stuff that she, I
Oh
believe,
yeah.
was cleared and it was all okay, but it's still something that has to be on her record. And there's just so many different rabbit holes that go down this path, of course. And I know that we could continue to talk about it, but it's interesting to hear kind of your perspective, but also know what you had to do
Right.
in this scenario, because it's not often you get to see a trail race test or a world. I don't know about world records, so it's great to hear that they actually are testing to some degree, and we'll be able to put legit on this in a week or two. Let's get to one more live question, and then we'll start talking about how it all went down.
Yeah, great question from Deb. She asked, Zach, are you able to have pacers during your world record
That's
attempt?
a good question.
No, they don't. I think it's probably mostly due to just the congestion on the track to begin with. If they're going to add any more, it's just going to kind of make something that they're already trying to juggle around a little more difficult. So no pacers allowed.
That's interesting. If someone else were to register and like, hey, I am just running my own race. It just happens to be 1 second faster than Zach.
Uh-huh.
I figured that probably wouldn't fly.
They do have there is some kind of maybe gray area with that where technically you're not supposed to rabbit another runner. So it ultimately comes down to the RD's discretion if they sense that one runner is there purely just to pace, um, even though they're technically entered. But yeah, you're not supposed to have a designated pacer whether they're entered or not. So I mean, it's tough too because it's gray area because you might have a situation where you have two people going head to head and they're not pacing each other. They're competing with one another, but it could look like they're pacing.
Right. In this case, 6 days in the Dome, are you thinking this is the venue that I set the record? Is it looking good the few weeks leading up to it? Are you feeling healthy? Like, was there anything in your mind that made you doubt yourself, or was the confident, because you have to be so mentally acute to deal with the same track 400 times? Was there anything in your mind that sort of gave you that doubt, or was it, I'm gonna get it, this is as solid as a day as I get?
Yeah, no, so that's actually kind of a funny story too, because I've certainly put in full seasons to prepare for these things in the past. And, since moving out to Phoenix, I've been the last couple of years, what I've been kind of doing just to explore the sport a little more is I've been kind of dividing my year into two halves. One is kind of a more trail side and the other is something flat and fast. So last year I did Western and Tunnel Hill were kind of the two cornerstones for those. And this year I did San Diego 100 in the spring/summer, and then originally I'd gotten into the Spartathlon. Well, I'm still technically in the Spartathlon, just in 5 weeks, and that was going to be kind of the peak race for this. And this specific event, the 6 days in the Dome, was a little kind of late to getting confirmed, mainly because they didn't want to step on the toes of the 24-hour World Championships that's coming up in September. So they wanted to make sure they weren't going to, lose interest because it was too close to that. So ultimately they nailed the date down, and I was a little uncertain actually as to whether I had enough time to switch over from the trails. Because for San Diego, I was doing a lot of kind of rocky technical trail to the flat, very runnable roads. So I wasn't sure. So in the back of my mind, I was actually originally planning this race to be kind of a tune-up for Spartathlon. And then once I started that training block for this, I started to kind of get my fitness back on the flats really, really quickly. And I had a few workouts that were just pretty indicative that I was ready to go. So as I got a few more of those, my confidence got a little greater, and ultimately I came to the point where I was like, all right, I'm gonna put in a couple really big block of training weeks before tapering, and then if I feel good on race day, I'm gonna go for it, and then we'll worry about Spartathlon when it comes. And for me, fortunately, that's what ended up happening. So it was a little different than what I would normally do, but it worked out well.
Do you call your shot ahead of time? Like, do you go to the race director and say, I'm going to go for it? Or is it one of those, you just show up and, if you're feeling it, you're feeling it?
Yeah, so I got to know Steve Durbin, the RD for this event last year, because he also is the race director at Tunnel Hill. So he's very familiar with kind of my passion for how fast I can go on some of these. So he had asked me, he's like, you think you're going to go for it? And I told him, if I feel good, I think I can do it. So we stayed in touch a bit before, and I told him that my workouts were showing that I could. My thought was I could maybe hold somewhere around a 6:40 per mile pace if I had a really good day. And that was going to be 6:52 and some change was the 11:28:03 is what I would needed to have just squeaked under. So then it was just coming down to whether I actually felt good on the day and then executed everything properly and didn't have any major hiccups. And when you're starting to kind of get down to those times that I was targeting, sometimes it just comes down to like how many times can you mitigate stopping to go to the bathroom?
Right.
my three best rounds at these have been Desert Solstice 13, 15, and then this year. And Solstice 13, I stopped 3 times for maybe a couple minutes total. In 15, I stopped twice for like 90 seconds total. And this year I stopped 3 times for maybe 2.5 minutes total. So you're really minimizing the amount of non-moving time when you get down to that level of efficiency.
It's wild to think that it does come down to that specific, literally timing your bathroom breaks. It would be amazing if they created a porta potty on wheels that like
they almost
while you're sitting.
Yeah, actually, they're at Desert. It wasn't a year I did Desert Solstice, but I think it was in 2012. But Michael Arnstein was running, and he was like on the edge of breaking 13 hours, and he just whipped it out and peed on the track while he was running, I think.
All that fruit.
So, yeah.
Now I'm thinking of like a device. It's like a cloak that just let it hang down, and you just carry a bucket with you and just run.
That's extra weight, though.
It is extra weight. You're right, but it's only it's only a lap. Who knows?
And do you have crew when you're on these?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because it's almost more stressful for the crew too, because like they don't get any break from you. Like you're coming around every 400 meters.
Yeah, right.
So the nice thing is it's pretty low risk. If something gets screwed up, whether we miss the handoff or if I ask for something and they have something different, we remedy it in a couple of minutes when I come back around the next lap. So that's kind of nice, but it's also pretty anxiety inducing, I think, especially if your crew's really invested in your day. They don't want to see you hit rough spots, but they're gonna see every one of them. So I was really my parents actually live like 4 miles from the Pettit Center, so I had a lot of family members out there. My wife Nicole was out there, and she knows very well what it's like to have ups and downs during 100-mile races. So she can kind of read me pretty well, and I think it's pretty stressful for her, but she does a great job.
I was seeing that you negative split this as well, which is just on par with another incredible feat. That you were able to do that. Was that intentional? Did you save? I know we're talking about seconds at this point as far as being able to dial in towards the end there, but did you save energy for the last 50 miles, or was that even a part of this equation? Are you going lap by lap?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's almost like a shift in philosophy in my own mindset. I think like all my other, this is the first 100-mile I've ever negative split, or even split for that matter. So my mindset in a lot of these events have always been, I'm gonna slow down the last 50 miles, and the goal is going to be to mitigate that. And I was probably leaning a little more to the end of like, if I have a real tight split but slightly slower the last half, that's the optimal race. I'm not as convinced about that anymore. I think a negative split is doable, and I think it may be the better move to go with. And so I didn't necessarily go into the race thinking negative split is definitely the plan. I was feeling things out quite a bit the first 30 miles. I hadn't ruled out coming through 50 miles around like 5.5 or a little over 5.5 hours, in which case I would almost certainly be looking at a positive split. And it would be kind of like what I was saying before, like, let's try to keep it to a handful of minutes versus, 20, 30 minutes. But when I got to mile 50 and I think I hit like 5:40:38, to be perfectly honest, that was the biggest seed of doubt I had all day. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to replicate that. And I remember thinking specifically at one point, like, I'm probably going to break 12 hours for 100 miles, but a PR might be the reality for today. So that was maybe the point where I was kind of on the edge for a while, where had I not had a few good laps after that and kind of got my pace back to where it needed to be, where I could go the other direction, and then, like, maybe run like 11:40 something again, or, or get into the 11:30s, but not break the record. So what really kind of clicked was, I hit, I think it was in the late 60s, or actually no, I got to 100K and I had improved my pacing from 50 to 100K enough where when I got to 50, I was calculating maybe like a 7:08 split for 100K. And I had a good stretch in there and got that down to where I ultimately came through 100K in 7:03. So that resonated with me primarily because in Desert Solstice in 2015, I split 6:58 for 100K. And I was feeling amazing at 100K there, but the wheels were really starting to come off me the last 20 miles. So when I came through at 7:03, like, something clicked in my mind where I was like, here's my chance to get myself back into that position where I was in 2015 with 20 miles to go. But this time I'm going to hammer and I'm not going to let it fall apart. So that really helped me get to around mile 70. And at mile 70 was about the point where I could start kind of looking at it as just one of my weekend long runs, because I'd done quite a few kind of 3 to 3.5 hour long runs that were between about 27 and 33 miles. So when I got to 70, I just kind of did a self-assessment and was like, my legs feel good enough where I think I can replicate just one more long run. So I just kept kind of telling myself, this is just one more long run. I've done these, each weekend for the past few weeks, minus the taper. So, that kind of gave the momentum. And at that point, I was no longer thinking about, I have to run 100 miles today at a 6:40 something per mile. And it was, I just need to do one more long run. And at that point, I don't think I would have guessed I was going to run as fast as I did in those last miles. I think I even squeaked down under 6:20 for a couple of miles at the end there.
Wow.
But it was just the momentum kind of rolled in the right direction instead of the wrong direction, which was pretty cool. And, I've almost, between this race and San Diego 100 earlier this year, my kind of mindset for 100 miles has shifted, which seems kind of funny to me, being that I've been running ultra since 2010. But, I've always seen 100 milers as like halfway is kind of a third of the race, and then 50 to the finish is like 2/3 of the race, just in the way it kind of hits you mentally. But San Diego and then this race, I felt like the second half went by faster, and those were the first two times that's ever kind of happened to me. So maybe I figured something out. We'll see.
I want to ask two questions. First, what was the reaction like from everyone else that was there? Did they know what was happening in real time? Does that sort of get around the arena? Or is it like kept amongst the RD and that sort of thing, and like maybe your crew? And what was the reaction like when you got not only the 100-mile record, but the 12-hour record as well? Because you kept running. It wasn't enough to break the record. You still had a couple minutes to go.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is interesting. I mean, when you think of ultra running as kind of a niche sport, even though it's grown quite a bit in the last decade, you get the timed event stuff. That's like a niche of a niche. So that's a pretty small community of folks. So, I've gotten to know a lot of them, and they kind of know where my goals are within that stuff. So a lot of times when I'll go to these, they kind of know that I'm more or less kind of targeting that. So they're aware of what I'm doing. And, they see me out there during the day too. It's, pretty clear in their minds that I'm not trying to last for 24 hours. Uh, so I think they're kind of anticipating like, well, what's going to happen, and they know like there's really no definitive uh, thing until you get near the end when you can start to really wrap your head around it. And the Pettit Center is a pretty big facility, so it was kind of cool to see people start to kind of trickle in as it got later in the day. There's not a whole lot of incentive to watch me run from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. when I've got 10 more hours after that. But if
Right.
you come by at like 7 o'clock, you can watch 2 hours of me struggling as hard as I can to keep pace. So it was pretty cool to have people, and I have a lot of kind of friends and family in Wisconsin since I grew up there that came to hang out and watch and cheer. So I had a pretty good cheering section going there at the end as I had the miles ticking down.
The last question, and this has been asked a lot in the chat room and everything like that, and this is what I wanted to ask from the very beginning. How the hell do you convince your mind that a quarter-mile track isn't boring? How do you snap out of that constant repetition, just the monotony? Besides switching direction, what is it that you do?
Yeah, the boredom's the biggest thing, and I think that's more or less what kind of keeps a lot of people from targeting it in the first place. It's one of those things where I think it really just becomes how you look at it. I look at it as like when I'm on a surface like that, you really don't have to pay attention to much other than just not running into somebody. So you can kind of almost get into like a flow or a meditative state and just really pay attention to what your body's doing. Because every step is very uniform, which is another unique thing about the event as well, I guess, is like you're just really hyper hammering certain areas of your body, but you can really kind of like feel yourself out with that and kind of get an idea of like where you're at and do a lot of like pretty accurate self-assessments, I think. So I like to do that. And I think part of it is just like that puzzle. And it's not a certainty. It's kind of like what I was saying before, where, some years sometimes you have it and you can just continually pick small goals along the way. And then when the self-doubt kind of creeps in, you can push through it and hopefully ultimately get to the end of the race before you run out of those opportunities to do that. But it's not a guarantee, as I've seen many times. But it is a few things I like to do is sometimes I'll say like, okay, I'm going to focus on this next 4-mile section. I'm going to think of a 4-mile stretch that I run back at home that's a little more scenic, a little more enjoyable, and that I know well enough to know where I would be at any given like quarter mile of that and just picture where I would be on that route. Other things I do is I try to go in with some things to think about and things to like kind of reflect on and things to be more or less grateful or positive about, so that when you do kind of get into this mental spot where you're like, why am I doing this again? You can look back and say, I have this opportunity today. This is my chance to take advantage of it. And these are the reasons why. And if you kind of just try to shift the mind to a positive state, I think that can be very useful.
Interesting. I've always wondered what sort of tool set someone has to approach an event like this around a track, what they have to bring to the table. And there does seem to be an element of visualization, being good at visualization, being good at sort of like taking your brain to another location, also being good to, like you say, you bring topics to sort of discuss with yourself in your brain of things that you can like kind of process. And that's really fascinating to think that there's almost that. Yes, of course, ultra running is mental, but there is this side of like thought that goes into what you're doing out there. So you're focusing not on the monotony, but on a myriad of other things while you're out there. That's fascinating stuff. We do, again, have some live questions. Kim has been waiting patiently.
Yeah, another great question from Nathaniel. They asked, you described the record as a huge weight off your shoulders after 6 years of training, and it was like finally putting the last puzzle piece together. What motivates you moving forward?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because I think my goals always been to try to break the record to a degree, but it's kind of shifted a little bit as well along the way. I think when I first ran Desert Solstice, that was like the driving force. And then it kind of shifted into like, well, how fast can I physically run 100 miles regardless of whatever number that ends up being, or time that ends up being, I should say. And then also to like, let's let's make this 100-mile pursuit kind of a thing, or a pursuit for other people other than just myself. So, for me, I think I can run faster. So, and that may always be the reality until I can physically no longer run faster. But, personally, I think so I averaged 6:47.5 per mile. I think going into this race, my thought was a perfect day. And I don't know that a perfect day is ever necessarily possible, but I think I can do 6:40 flat. And once you get down to 6:40 flat, that's 11:06:40. And, then we're getting to the point where can I run a sub 11-hour 100-miler? And I think, if we can clean up even more variables and make it as ideal as possible, get some competition out there, I think that's possible. I know other guys can probably do it. So, for me, it might just be a question of well, I've got X number of years left where I can realistically run as fast as I can. What is that end number for me? And maybe it'll end up being 11:19. I'd be totally cool with that if that's what it ends up being, but at least I'll know then. So I might be a little more picky and choosy about kind of how and when I do them, but knowing that I had a pretty good setup at the Dome, and that if there's maybe a couple of variables off, I could have the same day and run slower, or a better day and run the same time. So there is definitely that, but I kind of like the flat runnable hundreds to begin with too. So I think maybe a little shift towards some non-track based flat ones. I did one at Tunnel Hill last year, and there's a few others out there that are like that too. That'd be kind of fun to check out, I think.
I mean, knowing from your American record to the world record, shaving over 20 minutes off that time, it's what is possible next? I know you brought that up earlier in the show, and sort of inviting other athletes to test themselves and see what's truly possible. I can't wait to see what you get up to. I know that this has been super fun to sort of follow this journey of yours, and I can only imagine how amazing it was for you to accomplish this goal that you've had for so long. I really can't wait to see what's next, because if you set this goal and you crushed it, what is the next one, and how will you get it? Our guest tonight, Zach Bitter, just broke the world record in the 100-mile distance by running an 11-hour, 19-minute, 13-second 100 miles. Also, the 12-hour record. What was the final distance on the 12-hour? Was it 105.68?
It ended up being 104.88.
104.88. Monstrous effort. So amazing to see. He was mentioning earlier on about going 100K in 7 hours and 3 minutes. What's funny is that's half the time it took me to run my 100K. Almost to the nose.
It was all those minutes you accumulated in the restroom.
In the restroom, yeah. I just didn't have a porta potty that had wheels and a little hole for my legs to
You didn't have 0 feet of elevation gain and loss either, I'm guessing.
Right, no. There was more than 0, but less than a lot. No, it was still it's just an incredible feat, my friend. And it is so great to have you on the show to actually talk a little bit about it. Our guest tonight, Zach Bitter, is going to join us on our after show. We're going to ask all the remaining questions here, plus any residual questions that you guys might have that you want to ask of Zach. Please join us for that after show. If you would like to, all you got to do is go to patreon.com/thegingerrunner. We do a live show right after this for about 10, 15 more minutes with our guests every single Monday. So if you'd like to join our after show tonight, or view the archive or the future, all you got to do is just go to patreon.com/thegingerrunner. It's very easy. But before we let Zach go or move into the after show, we have something here for our for all of our first-time guests. It's a very easy segment on our show that we like to call the Quickie Question Quiz. It's a rapid-fire series of very simple questions, and our guests must answer them as quickly as possible. Zach, when you are ready to take on the Quickie Question Quiz, just give me
that sound very they must answer.
They must. If they don't, they run out of oxygen. We don't let them out of the room. It really is a very simple list of questions. You let me know when you're ready, but give me a thumbs up and we'll get right into it.
Cool. Let's do it.
What was your very first race?
I did the Presidential Physical Fitness Mile.
Someone did verify in the chat room, by the way, Zach, that those are still going on.
Yeah, they mentioned that their kids are doing it this year.
Well, that's good to hear.
It is good to hear because I remember doing those. I used to hate them. It's like, oh my God, I can't do pull-ups. What is this presidential?
We didn't have that in Canada.
Because you don't have presidents. You have prime ministers. They had the prime minister
physical
fitness
fitness.
challenge. And everyone just apologizes the whole time.
Exactly.
Favorite place to run currently?
Canal path.
Road or trails?
I'm very biased at the moment, but road.
Bucket list race?
If I had to say any, probably Leadville.
Favorite running movie?
Probably Prefontaine.
Guilty pleasure TV show?
Oh, let's see. Probably whatever I'm watching right now. Let's see. Guilty pleasure TV show. Does Seinfeld count since it's so old?
Sure, totally.
Okay, we'll go with that.
Favorite pre-race meal?
Pre-race meal, eggs and bacon.
What was the first thing you ate after setting the world record?
I had, I think it was a roast. Yeah, a roast. My mom was cooking, so.
Damn, I was like,
slow cooked roast.
Home cooking, like Wisconsin style,
like mom, like
and
mom
cheese
food.
curds too, because it was Wisconsin.
Hey, Caitlin Gerben and Ellie Gerben would love to hear that because they give us actual authentic cheese
really
curds.
good squeaky cheese.
The ones that
Squeaky-
squeak, right?
Yeah.
Squeaky cheese curds. And finally, what are your current running shoes, or what did you break the record in?
Yeah, so I wore the Ultra Solstice, which is kind of a little bit of a low profile trainer.
Awesome. Congratulations. You passed the quickie question quiz.
Yeah.
Told you it was very easy. Zach, where can people find you on social media? Where can they follow up? Where can they continue to enjoy these wonderful adventures and cool things that you get up to? Where can they find you?
Yeah, so the quickest spot to find any link is on my website at zachbitter.com. I'm probably most active on Instagram and Twitter, and Instagram is at zachbitter and Twitter is at zbitter.
Perfect. Wonderful guest tonight. It's so cool to be joined by the world record holder. Come on, that's amazing. Zach Bitter is just a rad dude, incredible athlete. Really cool to see what he got up to this last weekend. And to those who are still running at the 6 days in the Dome, don't stop. You still got lots of days ahead of you. Get some sleep, eat what you need to eat. This is really cool. Did we ever get anyone in the chat room?
No.
I was curious if someone would be tuning in. Like, even just the race director or something. Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe they missed that part. If you are at 6 days in the Dome, jump into the chat room and let us know. Yeah, because part of me is like, I bet someone running was maybe
there
watching.
was
or
somebody
something.
there that said they were there. I don't know if they were currently there, but they were there. Yeah.
I saw some of the comments that people actually witnessed Zach do that, and they said it was really, really cool. Such a cool moment.
Yeah.
So another big shout out to our wonderful guest tonight, Zach Bitter. He's going to join us in the after show here in just a couple of seconds. So if you'd like to join us again, patreon.com/thegingerrunner. But at the end of every episode, we like to recognize a member of our community who goes above and beyond, does something pretty incredible, and they are becoming our GR crew member of the week. Kim, who have you chosen as our GR crew member of the week?
This week's GR crew member of the week is the one and only Kim Wrinkle.
Hey!
Who ran
Kim. Hi, Kim.
Peak Ascent
Zach knows
on
Kim.
Saturday and placed 10th in his age group.
Kim, if you are new to the show, Kim has been a longtime supporter and just such a stout runner. He's running.
He's always killing it.
He's always killing it. Always out there. Has the cutest cats. He's always filming his cool mountain runs. He gets up to 13,000 feet, I think, every day. He's just a stout runner and has been doing this for quite some time. And we've had him on the show before. He's such a wonderfully kind, beautiful human. And he got 10th in his age group at Pikes Peak Ascent this last weekend. A lot of stuff happened on Pikes Peak.
I'll
So
give a plug
Kim.
for Kim real quick. He's so kind. His cats even let him put a leash on them. So
Yeah. It is just so great to have someone like him in our community. So big shout out to Kim. It's great to give him the GR crew member of the week.
Yeah.
Big thank you to our guest tonight, Zach Bitter. We'll continue on into the after show. Thank you everyone so much for tuning in tonight. We appreciate it very much. Subscribe to the channel and do all that good stuff. Am I forgetting? Oh, GR. Ginger Runner Global Run is our annual global run. It's our 4th year doing that. It's on October 13th. Registration is open now. If you go to rungrgr.com, you can register for this global run. It basically, on October 13th, you get to choose your route, you get to choose your location, but you run for 2 hours. You submit your results. We have prizes and all sorts of different categories that you can enter: most gain, most mileage, highest elevation reach, most donuts consumed, stuff like that. It's a lot of fun. We would love for you to join. It is a global community that participates, and registration closes this week. So you have until Friday to register at rungrgr.com. Thank you, everyone. Get out there, train hard, race harder, and party the hardest. I know I am. We'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Goodbye.
Ginger